here.
Oh, good evening, everybody. Mary, I see your audio is here now. So
Hi,
thank
Mary.
Hi.
we're fading in and out depending upon who leans forward. Thank you for joining us, everyone, tonight, and everybody that's not here on the Zoom meeting live that's going to see the recording here. As we have our special speaker, Dr. Debbie Mueller, is going to be talking about the anatomy of painting. So it's a special treat. And of course, this is a Valentine's Day, bring your own chocolate and wine. So Randy, where is our chocolate and wine? That's part of the rule. You have to show it. As the rule in the dental office, if you pull off a crown, you have to bring samples. So
Dark chocolate, the dentist buys.
now you're going to tell us the key
No,
lime?
no. Oh, okay. Well, I will tell you this dark chocolate with key lime pie flavored filling. I do have to say, give my hubby credit. He bought me an early Valentine's Day gift. It was a lemon lime tree combined. It's a Meyer lemon and key lime tree, and it came with this chocolate bar.
That's so awesome.
So
Well,
he's on the good list.
I'm on the good list, but I'm also taking up time from Debbie here. So, Debbie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the anatomy of painting and your background and how you became an artist and a little bit about yourself from a personal perspective too. I'll turn the mic over to you.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I am an OBGYN and I am still practicing, although I'm planning on retiring at the end of the year. And I started painting just about 9 years ago, kind of out of the blue. So I'm going to kind of tell you that story first in a PowerPoint that I've done for you. And then I'll kind of move into sort of a deep dive in sort of the more technical and other aspects of how does a painting actually get made? Because I think if you had asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have been pretty clueless on what the process looks like. So feel free to jump in and interrupt. I'm going to share my screen. All right. I want to move that. Oops. Let's go back one. Why is it not moving back? There we go. All right. So our favorite anatomist over there. So I want to talk a little bit about genetics and the genetic dice roll. So this is one of my favorite pictures of me with my parents. We were, I think, at the MFA, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I was spending a day. So my mom was a hobby painter throughout her life. She, I believe, sold a single painting at one point, and then probably immediately regretted it because everything else she ever painted, she pretty much held on to, except for a few things that my sister and I have. She did some abstract work, like what you see pictured there, but she also did a lot of more realistic work that I'll show you in a minute. My dad, on the other hand, wouldn't hesitate to say that he had no artistic ability, but he has always enjoyed working with his hands and is crafty. So that's some of his stained glass that you see on the right. So he got into stained glass. He's also done pottery. We actually took pottery classes together. And the stained glass became really a passion. He's actually still doing it. He's 88. And he is still doing it, though he's got a pretty wicked tremor that makes it a little challenging. But he's also made beautiful kaleidoscopes and things. But he would always say, oh, I don't have any artistic talent. I can just put things together. My mom, on the other hand, this is an example of some of her work. And she was really, I think, a very good artist. She had a great sense of adventure and was willing to try new things. Later on in her life, she did some abstract painting, which I think shows bravery. So sort of very different things. And so my comment is apparently I am my father's daughter, or at least that's what I thought. This is my 6th grade, or I'm sorry, 6 years old, first grade. piece that actually got into art in the park. But I was pretty clear that I was a crafty person. So in medical school, I did a lot of cross stitch to keep my hands busy so my mind could concentrate on lectures. I did pottery from the time I was in high school on and off all the way really through my life. I picked up mosaic. That urn you see is about 3 feet tall. It's just to get the scale of it. But of course, I didn't come up with that design. There's a sun on one side, a moon on the other, and they were copied from an album cover and a t-shirt respectively. But I couldn't have drawn that or come up with a design on my own. But I loved color, and I certainly had an appreciation for aesthetics. So go back to Sarasota, 2016. My parents had spent the winter there, and they invited us to come down for a vacation. I'll call it a vacation, but it really was not such a great vacation. We were kind of cramped in their apartment. Our oldest daughter used up all the hot water most mornings before my father could take a shower, and that was not making him very happy. And then one day it was raining, there was nothing to do, everybody was grumpy. And my mother said, well, I have some paint here. Do you want to paint? And I will confess to you that I looked down at my iPad to see if I had any lives left on Candy Crush. Thank goodness I did not, because if I had, I don't think I would be an artist today, because I really didn't have any interest in painting, but I had nothing better to do. So I reluctantly said, oh, okay. And I pulled up this image from a restaurant in Sarasota that I had taken the night before. And she had some palette paper and acrylic paint. And I spent an hour painting what I think we can all agree is not a very good painting. But I immediately recognized that I loved the way I felt while I was painting it. And so the next day I very sheepishly said, do you think we could paint another? And so when I came back home, I decided that that I wanted to keep doing it. So I didn't know anything. I went to Michael's. I bought the big 48 color set of paint because I didn't have any idea that you could actually mix colors together. And I started copying photos, looking at YouTube tutorials, and of course, I came to this with no drawing experience or education. So if you look at my painting of Iceland, you will see that the rules of perspective have been quite thrown out the window. And so that was and continues in some ways to be a challenge for me. So people often will look at my work now and go, wow, you're just so talented. And they don't understand that everybody starts at the beginning. And so that's why I like to say that talent is really nothing more than hard work and passion, that everybody starts at the beginning, and where you go depends on what you put into it. So after a couple months of making those, I said, I think I need to take some classes. So I enrolled in some art classes. The Girl with the Pearl Earring was a master copy that I did in the first class that I took. It took a while to really find the correct teachers, but you can see like, oh, something's going on here. So this is good. In the summer of 2017, I went to Monhegan for the first time. Monhegan is a tiny island off the coast of Maine. It's about 10 miles offshore. There are ferries that leave from a few different spots. It is remote. There are no, you can't bring a vehicle to the island. The ferries that go there only carry passengers. There are a few trucks on the island that the businesses use, but it is in many, many ways the very same as it's always been. A lot of that, like that White House that you see on the bottom, that was built, I believe, in the 1700s. So, that red house is iconic. So Monhegan has been a painter's destination for a very long time. And so you can find paintings by Winslow Homer and Rockwell Kent and Edward Hopper, and the list goes on and on. The Wyeths have all painted there. In fact, Jamie Wyeth owns a home there, and we've seen him a few times. And so it was really a special place. And the man on the left that you see is my friend and mentor, Todd Benita. He was teaching the workshop that I attended, and something happened during that week. And when I came back, I was an artist. Like, my work got immediately better, and my eye, I guess you would say, and that sort of launched me, if you will. The next year, on a whim, I entered Artist Magazine's annual competition. They have a category of the competition for what they then called student artists, and I think they have a different term for it now, but it was basically anybody that had been painting for less than 6 years. And I got an email, or maybe a phone call, from someone at the magazine, and he was like, I need to tell you that you've won first place for the landscape division. And then he stopped, he goes, you need to know, this is a huge deal. So my painting was, which is also Monhegan. So that painting on the left is the Lighthouse Keeper's House on Monhegan. And you'll see it again a few more times. So that was in the magazine, a little article about me. And the same year, I joined a local art guild in the Kennebunks, and my first exhibition with them, I took the best in show. So I was like, oh, maybe this is going to work out. So I do think it's important to acknowledge influences. And in terms of my early painting influences, for sure, Edward Hopper. I mean, weird things happen. Like, not long after I started painting, people would always say, if they compared me to a painter, it was always Hopper. It was never anybody else. And it was embarrassing at first because, first of all, I mean, Hopper is so like lonely and kind of like gloomy sometimes, and that's not who I am. But I didn't want people to think that I was like trying to copy him, because that certainly wasn't what I was doing. It was really just, that was kind of what my style was, what I was drawn to. But a contemporary artist that I was drawn to, and you, I think, can see the similarities between Hopper's work and Tim's work, is Timothy Horn. He's a California painter, and does a lot of plein air painting, and really, like, his way of describing light just totally mesmerized me. And so I did have the opportunity to study with him. So I'm going to kind of fast forward through the intervening years. I studied with Tim. I've gone to other workshops. I now study with a still life artist named Sarah Sedgwick, who's a wonderful teacher. And my work has evolved. I don't want to say I've left landscape behind. I really do enjoy landscape painting, but I really love painting from life. And if you're doing a landscape, it means plein air. And obviously living here, January, like painting outside, that's not my jam. So in the winter. So I really love doing still life because I can paint from life any time of year. And then actually the upper right one, the donuts, that was a plein air painting also. I bought the donuts and put them on a table outside and painted that as part of a quick draw competition at the Cape Ann plein air competition this year. So so you can see things have gone along. This is a fun slide because this kind of shows my progression. The first painting was that first year of painting, and it was a class that I took with an artist named David Lucier. And he had a packet full of photographs, and he's like, you can pick anything you want and paint it. I'm like, oh, I'll paint this one. And he's like, oh yeah, that's Monhegan. I had never heard of Monhegan. Weirdest feeling to go to Monhegan and be in this place that I had painted that I had no image of. So the one on the right was done, I think, a couple of years later after a trip to Monhegan. I think that one was done from a photo. And then the one on the bottom was done more recently, and that, I think, was plein air. So you can see that my style, has gotten a little more refined as time has gone on. So how does she do that? So it's interesting. I actually think that painting and surgery carry something in common in that I feel like when I'm doing both of them, first of all, I experience a flow state many times. But the other thing is that I think that it really uses both sides of our brain. And that's why it's sort of so satisfying to me. So the analytical side, I think if you had asked me 10 years ago, what does a painter do? I would have imagined it was all sort of right brain, creative feeling, no boundaries, no rules. But in fact, at least when you paint in a representational way, there's a lot of analysis that goes on while you're painting. In fact, it's continual. I mean, the talk in my mind is always, is the angle right? Is that color too light or too dark? Should this tone be more saturated or less saturated? So there's always a lot of that going on. But yet it's like, what am I going to paint? Like there's a lot of creativity, of course, that goes on into that as well. So where does it start? It starts with an idea. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, I had a solo show at my gallery here in Portsmouth that Harry's always loved lighthouses. And we decided to do a show that had all lighthouse paintings in it. And we partnered with the American Lighthouse Foundation, and I donated 20% of the proceeds of any painting sales. And so it was really great. And so I guess he's not the head of the local chapter of the American Lighthouse Foundation, Jeremy D'Entremont, was kind enough to let me use some of his photos, because my goal was to do a painting of each of the 18 lighthouses that the American Lighthouse Foundation administered. So this was a lighthouse in Rhode Island, I believe. What's that? Rose Island Lighthouse. And so I loved it. It kind of reminded me of a wedding cake a little bit, kind of Victorian feeling. And I wanted to paint it. And so these were the images that I had. But none of these really would have made a great painting if I had copied them exactly, in my opinion. So how do we make something good better? So the image that you see on the left was the image that Jeremy had provided to me. But what that did was it put my center of focus, the focal point, which in my mind was sort of this sunlit face of the building, smack dab in the middle of the painting, which is not a good location. Many of you may be familiar with the rule of thirds. It's something I learned about first taking a photography class. And then it absolutely applies to painting as well, which is that if you were to divide a canvas or a photograph with tic-tac-toe lines, where those lines meet, those are sweet spots. And so putting a focal point or an area of interest in one of those locations is going to tend to make a more successful image. This also would go along with if I were to draw in here a Fibonacci sequence spiral, it would sort of end up right in that same spot. So it kind of both works, but obviously this didn't work. So what I did, oops, I don't show it here. You'll see it in a minute. So what I did was I guess you can see it here. I extended this image mentally, more or less. I probably could have done it in Photoshop, but I'm not very good at that. And so I decided to extend this to the left so that this would live in the space that is one of those sweet spots in that corner. So I have a few videos coming up. A couple of them I'm going to show you all the way through, and I've narrated them in the PowerPoint. And a couple I'm going to sort of fast forward a little bit. So this one I'm going to let you listen to. So this is filmed from pretty much exactly where I'm sitting.
So before I start mixing colors for the next layer of the painting, I thought I would show you a little just about my studio space and the palette that I'm using. You can see we're in my living room, and I really like having my studio at home. There are a lot of artists who prefer to go outside their homes to do their work, but For me, I love being able to paint for an hour and not have to go anywhere, especially in the winter. So this is very convenient. It's a very small footprint, as you can see. I have my easel and I have this cabinet, which is my tabaret is the word that's used for an artist's table. But it's got lots of storage in it. All my paint is in there and mediums and tools and things like that. So I work on a glass palette. It makes it really easy to scrape at the end of the day. My piles of paint are on this L-shaped piece of plastic that you see here that is used to store it. And so that goes inside this tube. It's called a palette garage. And the ends of the tubes have a little cap that's impregnated with some clove oil, and that extends the life of the paint pretty significantly. So this way I don't waste paint. There are a lot of people that just throw out what they don't use at the end of the day, but oil paint is expensive. And so I mix on my glass surface, but those piles sort of get refilled and then I'm able to store them in between painting sessions. I use what's considered a fairly limited palette. There are some artists that squeeze out 20 different colors, but I do like using a limited palette. For one thing, it's fewer decisions. The other thing is that there tends to be more of a harmonious nature to a painting when there are fewer colors in it. Some of my paintings even just have one of each of the primary colors plus white. But I do have a few extra colors here and sort of convenience colors. This is called a prismatic palette because it has a warm and cool version of each of the primary colors, plus a couple of extras that I'll tell you about. And so if you imagined going around the color wheel, when you get to a primary color, you approach it from a side that's warmer. For instance, on your way to red, you'll go through orange, and that would be a warmer color. But red then goes to violet, and so that's a cooler color. So just to understand, it's all relative, but there's warms and cools of each. So I also always lay out my palette in the same way. And you can see kind of from the stains on that palette garage that it's always pretty much the same. And that way, it's sort of almost like a piano player that knows their fingers know the keyboard and know where to go. And this way, I don't really have to think very hard about which pile I want to dip into to change my colors. So it starts on the left, and this is, you can see I have a giant tube of it. This is ultramarine blue, and this would be considered my cooler blue. And then this is one color that I actually tend to change a lot. This is my warm blue, and I could use something like cerulean or manganese blue. This is a blue that I can hardly pronounce, Chevenings blue. It's specific to this Old Holland brand. But it's a little more kind of like that cornflower, greenish blue, cerulean. The next color is a convenience color. It's called Viridian. And it's the color that you see in kind of like if you think about at the coast, you know, when you see waves crashing and you can kind of look into them. I'm going to just add a little bit of white so you can see it better. But it's a color that's difficult to mix from the primaries. So I find it convenient. You can get some intensity in the foliage. Then the next colors are my cool yellow and my warm yellow. So my cool yellow is a lemon yellow, and the warm yellow here is a cadmium yellow deep. And again, there are some different versions of those that I'll switch, but this yellow has more green in it. This yellow has more orange and red in it. Then to my reds, this is trying to kind of start to eliminate some of the things that maybe you wouldn't want going into the water system. So this is the traditional warm red would be a cadmium red. And what you can see here is this is a cadmium free red light. And so I've been using that. So that's my warm red. Then my cool red is called alizarin, and it's called alizarin permanent because the traditional alizarin was what was called a fugitive color. It would basically bleach out in sunlight. And so people tended to avoid that. But that's my my cool red. The next color is another convenience color. So this is burnt umber, which is essentially, if you think about it, a very dark brown. Again, if I add a little white to it, you can kind of see that it's just a really nice warm brown. And I could mix this. I could totally mix this color with just my primary colors, but burnt umber is dirt. It's basically dirt, which is ground up and then combined with some linseed oil. And so it's very cheap as opposed to the cadmium colors, which are at least double. And so to me, this is quicker, this is easier. And so it's just a convenient color to have. What I use it a lot for is to make a very dark, kind of my black, if you will. So I'm using some ultramarine blue and some burnt umber. And when I combine those together, I have a wonderful, dark, deep black. So that's what I use that for. And then my final color, of course, is white. And this is, actually, I don't use this quick dry white. This is a zinc titanium white mixture. But white is your workhorse, and that's why white comes, I buy it in such big tubes. You know, probably 80% of a painting is actually white paint. So, so that is my palette. And from here, we will mix some color.
All right. Let me just make sure yep. Okay. So, oops.
So before,
Sorry, there we go. So what I do when I begin a painting is, first of all, I do a sketch. And a lot of times, I don't know if you can see it on this one, I usually will use a grid. So there's an app that will let me put a grid on a photo, and then I'll put the same grid on my canvas or panel and be able to transfer it that way. And so this looks like I did it in pencil. More often now, I'll just do it in really thin paint because I can wipe that out. But I'll start with a drawing. And then the next step is to do what's called a monochromatic underpainting. So my first layer is typically all one color, although you will see in this one that I sort of vary it. But the idea is that I want a roadmap with regards to value. Value is how light or dark a tone is. And I want to establish that in a monotone before I add any color. So this one, I'm actually going to fast forward a little bit because you don't really need to see it, you know, to the original speed. So I'm using probably some, at this point, some burnt sienna, which is a little more of a rust color or orange color. And then I think I also used some burnt umber in these areas where I wanted to be able to get a little darker. Sometimes I'll just use a single paint and vary the thickness of it to express the value. But I'm laying in sort of the background, all those trees that we talked about. And there's no real detail here. I mean, you know, I am putting in the windows, but in terms of like foliage and that sort of thing, this is really just a roadmap for me so that when I come over it with color, I know what I'm doing. All right, so I've got that set up.
okay, we are at the point where it's time to add color to this painting. And so I have a reference photo that I will use as a general guide for color, but I won't necessarily stick to it 100%. So what I'm going to be doing is using the colors that I showed you yesterday to blend. You know, when I first started painting, I had no idea that you could mix colors. But and bought like the big 48 package set. But in fact, you can, and we think about 3 different qualities of a color. One is its hue, so is it blue, is it red, is it orange? The second is its temperature, so is it a cool blue or a warm blue? And then the third thing, oh, I lied, there are four. The third thing is its value, and that's how light or dark it is. And then the fourth thing is its chroma, which is how intense it is. And I'm sure you've all seen paintings by new painters, and everything is so bright. The grass is super green, the sky is super blue. And the reality is that in nature, there's not intense chroma. And so the way that we reduce chroma is by using the color wheel and using a color that's opposite. For instance, if I take some of this red and then add some of that green to it, you will see that what I come up with is, something very, very neutral and in the middle. And if I add a little white, you'll be able to see what color that is. In this case, it's actually a purple. But we'll call that a gray, and it certainly neutralized both colors. It is really neither red nor green now. So that's what I'm going to be using to try to make the colors a little more realistic and true to life. Okay, we are at the point where it's time to.
All right, so this, oh no, that's,
Um,
I'm sorry, there we go. So I'm gonna kind of fast forward through this one too. And it's just showing me mixing these piles of color and thinking about the elements that I was just explaining to you, the hue, the value, the chroma, and the temperature. So I tend to make kind of strings of color and keep them organized. So the first pile you can see that I made is sort of a warm green, whereas the second pile that I'm making is more of a cooler green. The third, some of those other ones are more chromatic or more saturated in color. I'm making some of these darks for the rocks and changing that up. Even though this was filmed a few years ago, I still do color mixing separately before I start applying it to the canvas. I just find it really helpful to look at the colors side by side and be able to see what I'm doing. And in general, I'll make a light, the color of what something is in light and then what it is in shadow. And so you can see that that's what I'm doing here. So the white of the building and then the purple above it would be that color in shadow. So I get this great little set of spots, and then we're ready to go. So this one, I am also going to move through a little more quickly. So now I'm starting to apply some of the color. In general, with oil painting, we tend to start with our darks and then go to the lights. But there are people that do it all different ways. Some people will put their lightest light and their darkest dark down, so then they know that everything else needs to be in between. But you can see that I'm just adding brush strokes very gradually. And because I've done this underpainting, it would really jump out if I were to put a really light color on top of a darker area. So this is what keeps me more accurate with my values. In general, there'll be at least a couple of layers of paint on top of the underpainting. So I'll go in with a first layer, and then there'll oftentimes be yet another layer on top of that. So I'm adding some trim to the windows. Can be tricky, like in red paint, to then put white on top of it. It tends to drag through it, and sometimes it's better to let things dry. But in general, I work wet into wet. I tend to just go continuously. So that's kind of how we built that painting. Now, this is pretty good. but I wasn't really fully satisfied with it. Sometimes I just need to sit and look at a painting for a little while and decide what it needs, let it speak to me and tell me what it needs. And in this situation, let me back up for just a second. Remember, we talked about the rule of thirds. So I had put this, you see that this ended up on this sort of line over here, but there was nothing to balance. Like there's a lot of weight, visual weight on this side of the painting, and there was nothing to balance it. And so I added this seagull, which obviously I didn't necessarily capture with the camera, but I knew that this would pull some interest to the other side of the painting. But as I looked at it, I wasn't happy with the amount of contrast. It wasn't really jumping out. And so I left the gull the same, but I darkened the foliage that was directly around it. And that resulted in it popping from that spot. So much more obvious. And this is the finished painting. So I drew on both sides of my brain to be able to accomplish that. So what does my left brain do? Accuracy in drawing, relative values, that whole lighter, darker, design decisions. So putting things on that third, or controlling. Sometimes I'll do a painting and realize that inadvertently there's an area where there's a lot of contrast between light and dark and it's pulling your eye. And I'll say, oh, I need to tone that down, and I'll make it less contrasty than what I actually see as a way to quiet it down so the eye won't be going there. Continual comparison and avoiding regularity. There's a great tendency of the brain to try to make things at very regular intervals, which is great if you're a metronome, but is not great if you're looking at a painting and want it to look interesting and good. So having to avoid that. And then color choices, brushstroke, choice of what I want to paint, and in conveying emotion in my work, that's going to be all right brain work. So a little shameless self-promotion. I do have representation by a number of really wonderful galleries, mostly in the Northeast, but hoping to extend my reach, hopefully to Florida, and maybe out west. I put my website, Instagram, and Facebook in the chat. And I just want to tell you about a project that I just finished. Some of you may know about it if you get my newsletter. This is the 7th year that I've done the Strata Easel Challenge. The Strata Easel Company puts out a challenge to artists all over the world to draw or paint from life every day they do the month of January, and they also do September, but I always do January. And because I'm me, I can't just draw or paint every day. I have to do a whole painting every day. To make my life easier, I make them all the same size. So they're all 10 by 10 inches. This year, to make it fun, I painted the alphabet. So apples on the first day, berries on the second day, W was for waffles. The shoes were actually after the alphabet was done. That didn't fit in. E was for eggplant and eggs. At the end of the month, I make them available for less than what they would normally cost through my galleries or my website. So they're all available for $3.75. And every year I donate 31% of what I earn from this series to a different charity. This year I'm actually repeating World Central Kitchen, just because there's been so much that in so many ways that they've been necessary. So I do that. And if you're interested, there are still some that remain. And if you're interested, you can visit my website and see that series. And I want to thank you.
Well, Debbie, thank you.
That
That
was
was
fun.
wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thanks
Any
so much.
questions for Debbie? I'd like
Yeah,
to.
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I have a question, Debbie.
Yeah.
Do you work in any other medium besides oil? Do you do any other type of paint?
Rarely. I brought gouache with me on a trip that we took last year because I wanted something that was just a little more easier, to carry around. And I've done a little acrylic painting, But acrylics, what bothers me with them, first of all, they dry very, very quickly. A lot of what I do now, I pay a lot of attention to the edges between different colors, and acrylic, because it dries so fast, sets up so fast, it's harder to manipulate the edges. But what really drives me crazy is that it dries a different color than what you put it on. If you put on, in general, it dries much darker. So you put something on, you want it to convey that sense of light that I want in all of my paintings. And then I look back on it, doesn't look light anymore. So I just get frustrated with it, but I might give it a go again. Gouache does the same thing, but I don't know. So, but mostly oil, 99%.
Have you ever done any medical illustrations?
No, I mean, I don't know if you were there at the very beginning, but I started painting 9 years ago with zero artistic experience, zero drawing skills. And medical illustration requires such great draftsmanship, I don't think I could get there. It's also kind of nice to have something that feels completely separate from medicine, People have said to me, "You're a gynecologist, why aren't you doing nude women?" Like, I get that all day long. I don't need it when I'm painting. So, yeah.
Any other questions of Debbie? What wine are you drinking tonight, Debbie?
Why do I what?
What wine are you drinking? Wine? Are you drinking
A
wine?
wine? What wine? Oh, I'm drinking diet ginger beer actually. So that's my favorite.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
When you talk about the oils and the speed of of how quickly the paint settles or dries, one of your slides was sit and reflect, or sit and watch. What's your window of time that you can work with the paint?
So it depends on a few factors, but probably the biggest factor is whether I use a medium with my oil paint, and if so, which one. So like um if you just use the paint straight out of the tube, or you use linseed oil, it's going to be workable for 2, 3, 4 days. Like it takes a long time for it to dry. I kind of like things to dry a little quicker. I do most of my paintings in usually a day or two at the most. So I use an alkyd medium that helps it dry more quickly. So it still can take a couple of weeks for the entire painting to really dry enough that I can varnish it or frame it or ship it, especially if I'm building up thick areas of paint. There's a word in painting called impasto, which is where you see all that texture. Like if you picture like a Van Gogh painting, right? Where there's like a sculptural quality to it, where the paint is thick, that like without any kind of medium, that can take 6 months to cure fully, because it's not really drying, it's not evaporating, it's oxidizing. And so it does take, it can take a long time. But in terms of going into it to work into it, even my biggest paintings, I just like my personality. I get sick of a painting when I've been working on it for more than a few days. I just like, I'm over it. And so for me, it's much better to sort of work. It's the term that's used as alla prima, sort of at one go, and to kind of like attack it and conquer it and then move on to the next thing. Whereas there are other artists that will work on a painting for 6 months. And I just don't have that in my DNA.
Can you describe the Strava challenge and what that is?
Yeah, so the Strata Easel Company puts out a challenge to artists to draw or paint from life every day for a month. The people who do the challenge have to post their work online every day that you choose, either Facebook or Instagram, and you have to use the hashtag Strata Easel with it. They keep track of who is staying with it. And so the one requirement, you can use any medium, but it just has to be from life, meaning you can't paint from a photo, you can't paint from your imagination. And internationally, probably about 1,200 people start out doing the challenge, and about usually between 800 and 1,000 people finish it. It's amazing. There's a Facebook group for people that are doing the challenge, and people share their work and support each other and comfort people who have to drop out of the challenge because of illness or other factors. I've bought work from a lot of other artists who I've discovered in the challenge and been inspired by artists. It's a really nice way to enjoy January. So
Very nice. Tell us a little bit about the internet presence that you have and how that developed for you and how successful that is for you.
yeah, so it's an interesting thing without getting into a political discussion. Obviously, a lot of people, for a variety of reasons, are not terribly happy with Meta. But of course they rule. And so, Facebook originally, I think, was a good way to get your work out there. I mean, let me back up. So I've had a website for years. A website is essentially a storefront. It's a marketplace. It's a way for people to learn more about me. I've got videos on my website. I've got my CV, my bio, like a statement. So you can learn a lot from an artist's website, but you have to have a way to get people there. And so that's where social media comes in. So I kind of started out on Facebook, and that was really active for a while. And then I moved over to Instagram. You can cross post. And so I do post on both. But Instagram has probably been better for me. I have almost 10,000 followers now, and it's all been organic. It's just been, very gradual. But I started teaching this year. I'm teaching workshops, and I've gotten a bunch of students from Instagram. Like I know the name. Like I was like, oh, you're, like their Instagram handle. Like, oh, nice to put a face to a name and do that. And so I started an account on Blue Sky, but it's been harder to find art related posts and kind of find my people on that. And so I don't know how that'll end up going. So I'm gonna stick with Instagram and Facebook for now. My website's hosted by a company called FASO. It stands for Fine Art Studios Online. And on the one hand, they do a very nice website for artists. It has almost everything that an artist would want. And they also do a lot of marketing. They share, they call that daily art stream. So anything new that's been posted on any FASO website gets sent out to a email list of, I think it's over 50,000 people. So people do discover me through that. It's been worthwhile. I feel like they've been a little lazy with some upgrades. They, like PayPal, for instance, has a pay an installment option, and they haven't integrated that. So I'm a little frustrated. When I did the Strata challenge, I dropped the entire collection at 11 a.m. on February 1st, and they sold the same painting to two different people 4 times, like, because it was, you can put it in your cart. The only thing to stop it from being available to go into a cart is someone actually paying. So multiple people could put it in their carts, and then it let them check out, but obviously only one person could buy it. So fortunately, people were very understanding. Some people chose other paintings. A bunch of people asked me to recreate. That's actually what you see behind me is a painting that sold, and someone really wanted it. So I did another version of it for her today. So, but yeah, it's, I had started on Squarespace, and it was not, great for artists anyway. So I do plan on bringing my paint with me when we go to Germany and on our cruise. So that's the plan. I'm going to bring my oil paint because that's what I want to do. So I'll duck out for a few hours every afternoon and do a little painting, and Harry can tour with you all while I do that. But it's a great way to experience a place. Plein air painting outdoors. It's, you think that you capture an experience by taking a photo, but boy, you really like bring the experience into your body by painting it. You remember the sounds and the smells and it's just really, it's a wonderful way to connect to a place. So looking forward to that.
Well, I look
And
forward
to
to it.
capture the natural light.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Because photos, oh my gosh, they're terrible at capturing accurate color and light. I mean, they're good for drawing, except when they're not. I mean, a lot of photos, there's distortion at the edges. So like the buildings aren't actually doing this, you know. But no, you take a photo and the sky either looks white and then the rest of the photo looks okay, or the sky looks blue and then your shadows look black and the shadows aren't black. So it's really difficult. And so to be able to paint from life and see the colors directly and be able to interpret that is really special. Yeah.
Very nice. I look forward to seeing that firsthand.
Thanks. Yeah.
Any questions?
Julie, what kind of painting do you do?
I like to do watercolor primarily. I really love watercolor.
So hard.
Whole different, well, it's all relative. I think oil is the hardest thing of all.
That's funny. Watercolor feels a little unforgiving, but you should check out my friend Poppy Balser. She's an amazing artist. She does both watercolor and oil, but her watercolors are gorgeous. We have one.
What
in
is her name?
Poppy Balser, Balser. She's from Nova Scotia. But she travels in the US, does a lot of plein air competitions in the US. And she's a pharmacist, as is her husband.
Hey,
Yeah.
I think you are so talented and your visual ability is unbelievable. I mean, I am amazed at your work and your precision, and yet it's so full of feeling and it's so rich and it's really, really not. I'm anxious to explore your website.
Oh, thanks.
And I thank my very dear friends, Randy and Jay, for introducing me to your work and, inviting me tonight to pop in.
I'm glad you could be here.
Thank you so much. It's really great. I'm really amazed to be a physician and then to be like a fine artist and have them together is really, truly an accomplishment.
So I recorded a podcast not that long ago. It's called the Art Biz Podcast. It aired at the beginning of January, and we talked about making your own luck. And I said, well, there are some ways in which I was lucky. And one way that I was lucky was that it was raining that day in Sarasota, and another way that I was lucky was that this happened when my kids were older. We have 3 kids. They're 3 years apart. Our oldest has autism. If this had happened when my kids were, 2, 5, and 8, there's no way it would have happened. It couldn't have. And so our youngest was 16 when I started painting. And so, in terms of balancing it with career, if it had happened at a different time, it wouldn't have happened. And then about 4.5 years ago, I decided to take the job that I'm at now. Up until that time, I was still doing OB and taking night call and weekend call and delivering babies. And it was definitely tough to do that. And I recognized, first of all, that I was going to die young if I kept doing that, because it was very challenging. And also to have more time for painting. So I took the job that I'm in now, and I'm 0.9 FTEs, so almost full time, but I push it into 3 days. So I have 4 full days a week that I can work on paintings and do shipping and website maintenance and all the business side of things. I mean, I didn't talk about that, but that's the other thing that I learned. I don't know about you all, but I didn't learn anything about business in medical school. I never ran my practices. So, learning how to run a small business, that's a whole other skill set that I've had to kind of take on board. And so I'll tell you, it's fun to learn something at this age. Most people think, we get to this age and we sort of coast. And I love the idea that I'm definitely still on a upward trajectory in terms of my education as an artist and as a business owner and that whole thing. So yeah, I recommend saying yes to things that scare you and things you don't even maybe think you don't want to do, but just
Totally agree. You've got to challenge yourself, and it really, keeps you alive, I think.
yeah, for sure. The other secret, and I hate to tell you all, but artists in general are a lot nicer than doctors. I've met some really lovely people, made some wonderful friends. That's not really true, but certainly I feel like my social life has improved since I started painting.
Not getting any points here
I know.
at this meeting.
Friends and company excluded, of course.
Well, you said there's shared commonalities to areas of the brain and the talents that come from both. So there's
Yeah.
parallels there. Julie, your dad was a very proficient painter as well. Tell us a little bit about when your dad started to paint and how did that transpire that you also enjoy the, painting?
Well, I thought of you, Debbie, because you related from your father and like you take after him and with the art specifically. And I can relate to like what Jay says. My father, since I was a kid, he loved to paint oils, acrylics. He would do murals in our house on the wall. And I just kind of felt like I just always loved to paint too. And I had art lessons as a kid, but it was like a deep love of painting. And I still have it. And my wish is I can develop it in my future. I would love to make that happen. And
Yeah.
you really inspired me because I
Good.
got the paints, I got the brushes. You just have to do it, like commit to it, make the time, and just do what you can. And then you just keep growing and you keep getting the pleasure of that experience.
I recommend to people that they find a teacher, that they find a good teacher, because as we all know, not everybody who's a good painter is a good teacher. So you have to find someone whose style you enjoy, that you want to maybe emulate or at least sort of borrow from. But they also have to be a good teacher. So where do you live? Are you in Florida also?
I live in Delray Beach
All
in
right.
South Florida near Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, right in the middle.
Julie, your father painted even when his eyesight.
Yeah, my father was an incredible man. He had diabetes, which progressed, and his vision just got really, really bad. And he even painted with one eye. He had vision out of one eye, and he painted. He made a little, like you, he made a little art room, but he made it on his patio. And he had a group of friends come over once a week, like 4 other men, and they would paint and they would talk. And my father would purchase video. Like back then they had, the VCR tapes, and I had this collection of art tapes. And he always liked Bob Ross from from the PBS, and he would watch that. And he would just teach, like get whatever information he could get from any source, he would do it. And he never really had an art teacher, but he developed himself from being like really an elementary level artist. And he became, by the time he painted till about when he passed at age 82, he became very proficient. I mean, I have his paintings hanging all over my house because one, they remind me of him and I feel his energy through his paintings, but he's just, a person's character, their personality. He brought so much joy to the world. Like everyone, he's a jolly man, and he made everyone feel good, no matter who you were.
Well, I think
Paintings carry that out. You feel it, and with your paintings, you feel, you get a sense of who you are to a degree.
I was just going to say that I think your personality comes through your work. Like you definitely can feel understand who the artist is by seeing what they do sometimes. So
That explains my friend, another friend is a retired English professor. He takes vintage clothes, women's clothes, and paints nudes on top of them.
okay.
I think it tells us a little bit about his personality.
Well,
thank you for sharing with us.
thank you for being with me tonight and letting me tell you my story, and I appreciate it very much.
I apologize for apparent technical difficulties with the link. We do have a recording. I'll make sure that we distribute the recording appropriately with the accolades that you deserve. Thank you very much.
Debbie, that was fascinating. Thank you for sharing your story with us
Oh, sure.
and your
Thank you so
beautiful
much.
Thank you.
artwork.
Oh, thank you guys.
We
Thank
look
you.
forward to traveling together.
Yep, yep.
Soon.
I'm
I'll
looking
look.
forward to that as well. Yeah.
And I thank my very dear friends, Randy and Jay, for inviting me to pop in tonight. And they were raving about you. And they said, you have to just see her, who she is. And I'm so glad that I did, really.
Glad
Thank
were
you
here
for
too.
joining us, Julie.
Thank you so much.
Julie just got a film actually in that's being shown at the Boca Jewish Festival. Her first film she made.
Oh,
And
congratulations. That's exciting.
Thank you. It was like,
they
Yeah.
selected it as one of
Yeah.
many.
Congratulations.
thank you.
If anybody has anything that they wanted to ask me, like off the call, actually, I'll just put my email in the chat and you can always reach out that way too.
Thank you. And again, thank you once again. And everybody have a wonderful Valentine's Day.
Happy
I'm gonna-
Valentine's Day.
So happy
Yeah.
Valentine's Day, everyone.
I'm going to stop the recording. And if you have any personal off the record chats, of course, proceed.